Welcome to this explainer. Today we're zeroing in on a totally wild, incredibly chaotic 24-hour window, May 7, 2026. By mapping out the global diplomacy, the conflicts, and the crises that all collided on just this one single day, we get a fascinating, really raw look at how the gears of international relations actually turn. Let's dive right in.
You know, when you look at the news, it's easy to see these seemingly isolated headlines from different continents, but actually they're deeply connected threads. On this particular day, the world was basically hit by a perfect storm. We had nations standing on the absolute brink of war, critical diplomatic channels hitting total dead ends, and sudden wildcards just throwing everything into chaos.
To make sense of all this chaos, we're breaking this day down into 6 key themes: the US-Iran escalation, the global fallout, targeted Middle East strikes, global espionage, political upheaval in India, and finally, a deadly cruise ship wildcard.
Let's start with part 1, the US-Iran escalation and deal. This is really the center of gravity here.
Just look at the sheer scare of the military action happening all at once. We've got President Trump issuing a stark warning that any attacks on U.S. ships will result in Iran being wiped off the face of the earth. Right at the same time, a U.S. flying gas station aircraft issues a distress signal and just completely vanishes over Qatar. Add to that the U.S. actually destroying 6 Iranian boats in the Strait of Hormuz, while Iran claims they have satellite images showing massive damage to U.S. bases. I mean, this is the absolute definition of a flashpoint.
But right in the middle of all this intense friction, there's a parallel track. The two nations are actually reviewing a one-page memo proposing a 30-day window just to halt the fighting. It's basically a fragile band-aid. It leaves the massive underlying issues, like nuclear capabilities and who controls the Strait of Hormuz, completely unresolved. It's really just meant to be a precursor to try and get broader talks going.
So what did the world do with just the possibility of a 30-day pause? While global oil prices instantly dropped about 3%, settling right at $98 a barrel. To put that into perspective, it perfectly illustrates just how hypersensitive the global economy is to the Strait of Hormuz. Literally one whisper of peace and the markets breathe a massive sigh of relief.
Moving on to Section 2, the fallout from the Iran conflict, or as we like to call it, the ripple effect. Because this whole US-Iran situation didn't just rattle the oil markets, right? It created a massive diplomatic shockwave with America's traditional allies. Take Germany, for instance. President Trump planned to withdraw 5,000 US troops over NATO rifts regarding the Iran war, but Congress fiercely opposed it, warning that doing so would embolden Russia. And simultaneously, tensions are totally flaring up with the Vatican. The president attacked Pope Leo over his stances on the war and immigration, which forced the U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio to rush into immediate damage control meetings with the Pope in Rome. It's a fascinating look at the crazy balancing acts required in modern diplomacy.
All right, Section 3, Middle East targeted strikes and the ongoing regional conflict.
Right alongside those massive geopolitical shifts we were just talking about, Israel carried out some highly targeted multi-front strikes on this exact same day. They eliminated a Hezbollah commander over in Beirut, a Hamas commander tied to the Nova Music Festival massacre, and an airstrike also killed Azzam al-Hayya, who is the son of Hamas's chief negotiator, Khalil al-Hayya. It's a very localized, incredibly high-tempo tactical approach, all playing out in the deep shadow of the larger US-Iran crisis.
Let's shift gears to Section 4, deadlocks and global espionage. These are our frozen conflicts.
So, the scene shifts to Miami, Florida. Sunny backdrop, right? But the reality is actually pretty grim. We've got high-stakes, U.S.-brokered peace talks underway. Ukraine's top negotiator, Rustem Umerov, arrived specifically to orchestrate a prisoner of war swap. But despite the tropical change of scenery and international mediation, these talks immediately hit a complete brick wall.
And the ultimate friction point keeping everything deadlocked? The Donetsk region. Moscow is firmly demanding troop pullbacks there, while Kyiv absolutely refuses to cede an inch of land. The parameters for an agreement literally just do not overlap, leaving the whole conflict completely frozen on the diplomatic table. Meanwhile, looking over at the United Kingdom, 2 men, Chung Bil-bu Yuan and Chi Leung Peter Wei, were officially convicted of espionage and are now facing up to 14 years in prison. Their mission was to spy on Hong Kong dissidents living in Britain on behalf of China. It is a really stark reminder that major global powers are constantly continuing their conflicts through covert networks right in the backyards of other sovereign nations.
Okay, Section 5, political upheaval in India, looking at regional crises.
Now, the sheer speed of the localized destabilization here is absolutely breathtaking. Over in the state of Odisha, there was a violent armed attack targeting a political figure, leaving behind this devastating footage of a bullet-riddled vehicle. And on that very same day, in the neighboring state of West Bengal, the government experienced a sudden and total collapse. The Legislative Assembly was actually dissolved, and the chief minister's resignation was officially accepted. So while the whole world is glued to the US and Iran, these internal volatilities are just boiling over at lightning speed.
Finally, Section 6, a deadly cruise ship outbreak. This is our wild card.
Completely out of left field, independent of all this military and political maneuvering, a sudden and deadly hantavirus outbreak erupted aboard the MV Hondias cruise ship. And the severity of this wild card is undeniable. It has already claimed 3 lives alongside multiple other active cases on board the vessel. Containing a maritime outbreak like this is like trying to solve a giant moving puzzle. It requires massive international cooperation. The ship is currently heading to the Canary Islands, and multiple countries are scrambling to track passengers to prevent a wider spread once people start disembarking. But to put this wildcard into perspective, the World Health Organization has stepped in and stated that despite the tragic loss of life, the broader risk to the general public remains low. Still, it's just one more major crisis dumped onto a globally exhausted plate.
So let's take a step back. We've seen military escalation, deadlock diplomacy, global espionage, a sudden government collapse, and a deadly health crisis, all hitting the newswire on the exact same day. When the global system gets pushed this hard on so many fronts in just 24 hours, you have to wonder, something eventually has to break, right? With these shifting alliances and volatile flashpoints, how will these interconnected, high-pressure crises completely reshape the map by the end of 2026? Keep that puzzle in mind as we watch these events unfold. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.